Greetings and welcome to the Wednesday noon devotional for Grace Avenue United Methodist Church. My name is Billy Eccles-Richter and I have the joy of being one of the pastors at the church. And today I'd like to ask you a simple question as we start. Are you sure? Are you sure? I don't know about you, but that's a question that really haunts me a lot right now because there are so many things about which I am uncertain. We are living in very uncertain times, not just with the pandemic, but with all of the racial strife that is going on, with all of the storms that have come and gone during this crazy hurricane season. Just all the things right now in our lives that seemed so certain just a year ago seem very uncertain right now. And so when somebody asks me the question, are you sure? I have to tell you, I get a little defensive. Because right now in my life, I'm very tired of guessing, and I'm tired of second guessing myself as well. And maybe you are. To that end, I think there's a word today that we need to hear in terms of our trust in God. Peter Enns has written a wonderful new book called The Sin of Certainty. Now, that's a very provocative title, and I want to encourage you to get a copy and to read it. But I also think his subtitle is maybe just as important. It says, Why God Desires Our Trust More Than Our Correct Belief. And one of the things that Peter Enns talks about is that we have spent a lot of time building up these correct systems of belief. And now that we've run into some of these things that are just quite honestly unprecedented, we don't know how to deal with them. And he said one of the most exhausting things that happens to us is that we then spend time acting like sentries 24/7 on watch, trying to defend our faith, trying to defend our correct beliefs, when all the while we would find a greater sense of life and a greater sense of hope if we just could learn to trust God in the midst of all of this. He talks about, maybe you've had a skirmish at church. Maybe you've had a disagreement over a sermon that we've preached, or maybe you've had a disagreement or in a Sunday school class. Certainly all over social media right now, we're fighting about all kinds of things, including political ideologies and therefore which candidates to vote for. And all the while, we come back to this place where this haunting question stays in the back of my mind. Are you sure? Are you certain? In the midst of all of this, we find ourselves today needing to turn back to God. The word certain means literally to divide and to separate. And so what tends to happen is that the more we try to live and worship the God of certainty, the more that we find ourselves divided from one another's. We actually find ourselves building walls from one another's. Peter Enns says, and I believe very deeply, that God really wants something different. God desires our trust, to just trust God and how God will lead us into the future. And some of that means that we will hold on to some of our traditional beliefs. It also means that we will give up on some of those and we'll be led by the Holy Spirit in new ways. And when we do that, there's a greater sense of peace in which we're not standing guard all the time over things that have now not had a place in the world that we live in. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 is a verse that so many of us are familiar with, which I think is really important in terms of a conversation like this today. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, Trust in God with all your heart and do not rely on your own understanding. He will direct you and make your paths straight. Trust in God with all your heart. How important that is. The writer of Proverbs says it's even more important than relying on your own understanding or relying on any kind of belief system or ideology that you may have. John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, had a great idea when he talked about this as well. He used a word called assurance. Now, that's very different than insurance, where we try to protect what we have and set up systems where we can have a kind of security. And that may be important in certain aspects of life. But when it comes to faith, What we need is simply the assurance that God is with us. John Wesley said one time that assurance is the essence of faith. It is God's living and loving presence. That's what we need most today. In the midst of an uncertain time, we don't need a more rigid belief system. We need greater trust in God, in God's living and loving presence. I pray that today that's what you'll be able to lean into, and that's what you'll experience in your life today and maybe tomorrow and maybe for the indefinite future. We're going to continue to be guessing and sometimes second guessing, but God is always there, and it is in God upon whom we can place our greatest trust. I invite you today to think about how trusting God may be important, more important than defending those correct beliefs. I hope that you have a great week, and I hope that you have a week in which you trust God with all your heart. God bless you.